In one sentence, what are we talking about here? We are talking about nothing less than preventing the generation of our children, not in 5 generations, but our children, to live in a world which is not a complete catastrophe. That's seriously what we are talking about. Nothing less. So let's look at governments, and unfortunately the best way to assess what we can expect from each of these key players is to look at what they have done so far. What is their track record? So I'll just give a small example from governments. Since 1970, we had about 29 major international conferences on the environment, of which specifically 24 were about climate change. And since that time, we have not decreased, but we have increased our greenhouse gas emissions with 140%. That's more than doubled, okay? Now I'm a project manager. If I look at this as a project, I would say, cancel that project. This clearly isn't working. Now, let me be clear. I am not saying that we don't need governmental solutions, because we absolutely do. And I'm not even saying that we don't need international conferences. What I'm saying is that if you think that governments will provide the alpha and omega of the solution to climate change, think again. Because they haven't been able to in the past for the last 45 years. They're not doing so right now, unfortunately, and there is no reason whatsoever to believe if we don't change fundamentally our way we approach things, why all of a sudden tomorrow they would be succeeding. So let's look at somebody who's a little bit more important than me. That's the previous president of the United States. I'm not even talking of the current one. The previous president of the United States, he said, climate change is almost perversely designed to be really hard to solve politically. The natural inclination of political systems is to push that stuff off as long as possible. What is he saying here? He's saying that it's bloody difficult for politicians to come up with a solution to climate change. Now, why is that? Well, let's look at primary motivations. What drives a politician more than anything? A politician needs to get elected and needs to get re-elected. Otherwise, he's out of a business of being a politician. Now, our political election cycles tend to take 2 to 5 years. So that means that they have to come up with solutions in 2 to 5 years, present them to us and say, hey, do you want to re-elect me or not? But of course, climate change is in essence a long-term problem. Things that we do today have an effect in tens of years and even centuries. So you see that there's no match there. What it means is that politicians, they are not rewarded to think this long-term, unfortunately. So they need help. What do you think of when you're thinking of corporations, what they can do to make our society more environmental friendly? One of the major things is provide us with goods which are more environmental friendly, right? And when we're talking climate change, that basically means using less energy. Okay, let's look at some key examples of what has been done so far. Again, since 1970, I give you 3 prime examples. Refrigerator energy consumption has decreased with 75%. Housing energy cost per square meter has decreased with 25%. And car fuel consumption per kilometer has decreased with 50%. Now, when we're talking about energy efficiencies, these are the kind of results that we are looking for. This is really impressive. Imagine how many refrigerators there are in the world, how many cars are driving around, and all these houses that need to be heated. So this really makes a difference, right? Imagine how much energy that we are talking about here. So we're on the right track. Corporations is the way to go. Just a small problem, very tiny problem. During that same amount of time, world refrigerator production has increased with 200%. World building energy use has increased with 200%, and world car production has increased with 235%. So that means more than times 3. Yeah? So why are corporations so good at the first part, and why are they so bad at the second part when we're talking about combating climate change? Well, what do companies want to do more than anything? What's their primary motivation? They need to make profits, otherwise they're out of a business. And usually they want to make a little bit more profit every year, every month. So making more profit, how can you do that? You can make more profit by making your goods cheaper. Making your goods cheaper, an excellent way to do that is making your goods in a more energy efficient way. So that's good for them, but of course a second way is selling more products. So that is exactly what they are doing. There is no surprise here whatsoever. This is exactly what corporations are doing. And that's why today we are still every year emitting more greenhouse gases. So they need help as well. So what do we have left? Science and technology. Science and technology, what are we thinking of when we're thinking the big breakthrough in the last, let's say, 15 to 20 years when we're talking about science and technology and the fight against climate change? Anybody? We're talking of renewable energies. Exactly. So I'm presenting you this picture. This picture, why? Because you have solar panels and you have wind turbines on this, in this picture. You have many renewable energy sources, but right now there's only two who actually have the potential of providing the whole world with renewable energy somewhere in the future. And that's solar and that's wind. Okay? So that's why I'm showing you these two. Now we have heard about very stringent deadlines. We've heard about 2020, 2030 and 2050. But most importantly, 2020 and 2030. So we have a deadline, we have a goal, we have our means to our goal. So my question to you is, what kind of growing rates do we need for something like solar energy to get us towards our goal? It's a very elementary question, eh? Growth rates per year. I'll give you a reference point. A 7% growth rate per year in 10 years' time gives you a doubling of capacity. So if you have 1,000 euros, you put it in the bank right now, and you get a 7% interest rate, yeah, right? Huh? In 10 years' time, you will have 2,000 euros. So my question to you is, for solar energy, what kind of growing rates do we need to get us towards our goal? More or less than 7. I'll give you one example, and that's actually solar. Wind, I can show you something very similar. In 2006, we had globally 6 gigawatts of solar energy. 10 years later, we had increased it globally to 303 gigawatts. That means 5,000% growth rate over 10 years' time, or to put it differently, 48% per year sustained on average over 10 years. This is absolutely impressive. This is really, really impressive. And this is a big achievement for science and technology in general, and the renewable energy sector in particular. So we're there, right? This is it. Surely this is it. We just have to grow a little bit faster, a little bit longer. For sure we're going to get there. Just a tiny problem. Green line is the total amount of renewable energy in the world since 1970. The red line is the total amount of primary energy being produced since 1970. And the blue bars is the relative amount of renewable compared to the total. So we have spent, from 1970 to 2015, we spent 45 years. In 1970, we had about, according to those numbers in primary energy, we had about 12.1%. Look at that blue bar over there. 45 years later, despite this enormous increase in solar energy and wind energy, we have increased to 13.1%. 1%, 45 years, okay? Remember how much time we have left. What's going on here? We have spent very much time looking at the supply side, and we have not done nearly enough to try to cap or reduce the demand side. So, towards the solution, we are talking about the demand side. What can we do? You have to have priorities. If you don't have priorities, you will go mad. So, what did the IPCC say in their last full assessment report? They've said, not me, globally, economic and population growth continue to be the most important drivers of increases in CO2 emissions from fossil fuel combustions. So, what are we saying here? That the most important drivers of climate change are economic growth and population growth. If we want to be serious about tackling climate change, we have to be serious about daring to talk about those two subjects. You don't believe me? I'll give you a different example. In modern history time, I think aside from 1 year somewhere in the 1970s, we actually had 1 year where we actually decreased our greenhouse gas emissions compared to the year before, despite those enormous increases in renewable energies. Anybody knows which year? 2008, 2009. Exactly. What happened in 2008? We had a global economic crisis, and we actually decreased our global economic output, and we decreased the total amount of energy that we used. I don't particularly like saying this. I really don't. I wish there was an easier solution. But these are the numbers. Crank them whichever way you want. So, back to our scheme. Where are we? How does this scheme work? Well, we have governments, corporations, science and technology. What do? They fund science and technology. And what do? We elect people in government and we buy from corporations. So actually in this scheme we have quite an important role to play. But often we don't want to see it. Why? Because it's responsibility, right? Okay, so I'll go quickly towards what we can really do. Like I said, I only have a short amount of time. Basically, what can we do? There's two ways. There's an indirect way and there's a direct way. Indirect way is talk about this subject. You guys, all in this room, you probably know more than 99% of the people on this planet about climate change. Certainly after the two presentations of the two gentlemen before me. Talk about this. Talk with your family. Talk with your friends. Talk with your colleagues. Talk about how serious this problem is and how urgently we need to tackle this and what we can really do to make a difference. Talk about this. Make your voice heard. Make your voice heard in whatever way that you can do best. And of course, ultimately, we have had elections just in October, and we're having very important elections in May. If you want political actions, make your voice heard on a political level, okay? When you go into that voting booth. If you want climate change to be the top priority of your politicians, you have to make it your top priority. Not before that, you will find the politicians that act for you. Now, we are talking about changing, and the society needs to change, and everybody needs to change, and you need to change, and you. And that's all very nice, but it's very difficult to say that if you don't lead by example. You will sound very hypocritical very quickly. But of course, we need priorities. Once again, otherwise you go mad. How can we reduce our impact as an average person in a Western country? Right? First up is, if that's still a possibility for you, think about how many children you want to be putting on this planet. Right? This is population growth. Take a very close look at this graph. You see they cut it in two because the first one is so high. This is by far the biggest impact on your personal carbon footprint that you will ever have. Secondly, can you do without a car? There's been many examples that we've talked about commons. If you live today in city centers, you have folding bikes, you have electrical bikes, you have public transport, you have car sharing projects. If you can live your life without a car, this is the second major thing that you can do to reduce your own carbon footprint. Thirdly, flying. Flying is hugely polluting, certainly when we're talking about climate change. I'll give you an example. This example was also given on television by us yesterday. If you eat vegan for 2 years, or you find the courage to leave your car completely behind for 1 year, and then you take one holiday trip to Thailand, you have completely annihilated any savings that you have done on your carbon footprint. These are the numbers, 3.5 tons, something around those lines, okay? So try to maximally reduce the amount of flying that you need to do. If you can, quit it altogether. At fourth place is renewable energy sources and your electrical car. Only at fourth place, huh? Remember this. And fifth place is your diet and the amount of meat that you are eating. So this is an average for an average person in the West. Of course, your personal carbon footprint, the priorities can differ a little bit from person to person. Okay, I almost want to end, and I want to end with a quote from originally English writer Robert Boltz. Stephen Colbert also used this one. There is no secret society out there that will tap you on the shoulder one day and show you the way. Society has no more idea of what you are than you do, because ultimately it only has your brains to think with. Every generation must define itself and so make the world that suits itself. And from us, we are by far the richest and the best educated generation that ever lived on this planet. We can and we must change the society that we are living in today. So let's start, and let's start now. I would like to ask you, before we go into the debate, you probably have 1 to 3 minutes, really think about how you are going to reduce your own carbon footprint from now on, and what you can do to contribute to trying to reducing the global amounts of greenhouse gases in the world. I thank you very much.